The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Now Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Now do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am no Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests, they handed you over to me. Now, what have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom did belong to this world, my attendants would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not here." So Pilate then said to him, "Then you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say I am a king. For this I was born, for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. And everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Today is this wonderful feast to Christ the King. It is the omega point that prepares us for the Alpha. In other words, it's the very, very end. It's the end of the liturgical year. It's the end of all kind of things to prepare us for Advent, for that which is coming, for that which is not here yet. And so it's important for us to understand why we're doing this, because it's really an important feast day. But I beg your patience, because I want to share with you a little backstory about this feast day and put it in context so that we can understand why it is so very important, not just for our now, but for our future as well. This feast is, less than 100 years old. It was first established by Pope Pius XI in 1925. For the first 30 or 40 years, it was always celebrated on the last Sunday of October. Then when Paul VI was with the Second Vatican Council, they moved it to this last Sunday of the year, the 34th Sunday of the year, and we made it into the Feast of Christ the King. Now, the reason Pius established it primarily is because of what was going on in the world at the time. And what was going on in the world at the time was catastrophic. The First World War had just finished, and the world was in chaos. Germany was in shambles. France, all of Europe was in absolute shambles. And what was sneaking in was this strong secularism and strong nationalism. And to counteract that, the Holy Father wrote an encyclical, and the first encyclical in 1921 that he wrote was called The Inscrutable Designs of God. And in that encyclical, he makes a warning. He says, unless we get out of this secular world and into the divine world, unless we turn to God, all I can say is if you thought this last war was bad, wait till you see what's coming. What he was writing in 1921 was absolutely prescient for what was going to happen in the Second World War, the most catastrophic of all the wars that we have experienced. And so 3 years later, in 1925, he establishes this feast of Christ the King. And he's saying, this is the King of the universe. We've got to transcend where we are right now in the midst of this nutsiness of the world into bowing before a real sovereign. Because if we don't bow before the real sovereign, we're going to bow before the fake sovereigns. And the real sovereign is God. Now the reason he's so hot to trot to do this is because, 30 years ago, the philosopher Frederick Nietzsche proclaimed that, God is dead. He writes, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we killed him." Now, Nietzsche was an atheist, and what he's basically saying wasn't that God died. What he was saying is that there is no God. We're God. We're the answer. We, since the Enlightenment, have finally discovered that the center, the pinnacle of the universe is the human being. There's no God in the heavens. We decide what's right. We decide what's wrong. We are the sovereigns. We sit on the throne of power. And it was for this reason that Pius XI then established this feast, because all he had to do was open his eyes and he began to see what was happening to fill the void of the chaos. And what was filling the void of the chaos were authoritarian leaders. You know, whenever we feel like we're in chaos, we look for some kind of authority to give us some kind of security. And of course, the world was in economic chaos and political chaos and falling apart at the seams. And what rose up in that time? Well, Mussolini rose up with the fascists. Hitler rose up with Nazism. Lenin rose up with communism. What do they have in common? Totalitarianism. I'm the only one who can save you. Follow me and you will be safe. And so the seed of power, they think, is there. You know, after the Second World War, they were finally defeated. And we were convinced at that point that liberal democracy won. And we were uber convinced in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell and communism collapsed, and that was the last bastion that we had to fight against. And we thought, oh, that's it. See, somebody even wrote an article called The End of History. There's no more wars, no more breaking out, no more chaos. And we saw China with Tiananmen Square, and we knew that they put that down. But we were convinced that if we could just open them up to trade, that they would become a liberal democracy too. Well, guess what? Not only has it not happened, but it seems like we are on the precipice of going where we were 100 years ago. Hence, the necessity of Christ the King. Today in the book of Revelations, we read that he is the firstborn from the dead. He is the Alpha and the Omega of all that is and was and is yet to come. He is the beginning, he's the middle, he's the end. He is the sovereign of the universe. He is the one before whom we bow. He transcends all political powers, both on the left and on the right. Why? Because he has the ultimate power. And it is the power of God. And what is the power of God? The power to love. The power to liberate. The power to forgive. You know, every 3 years we celebrate this feast with different readings. You know, we're on a 3-year cycle, A, B, and C. We are finishing year B today. Next Sunday we begin year C. In year A, we read Matthew's version of the king. And of course that's Matthew 25, where the king comes back and he's dividing the sheep and the goats. And it's not between those who believe and those who don't believe. It's between those who did and those who did nothing. Between those who fed the hungry and clothed the naked and visited the sick, and those who said, we didn't know. Those are in their own little world. Next year at this feast day, we're gonna find Jesus dying on the cross. Strange place for a king to be, and on top of his cross is written I-N-R-I, Jesu Nazaroni Rex Judei. This is Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews, and he's dying between two thieves, and he turns to one thief and he says, you are an outsider, but you dare to believe today you will be with me in paradise. But today we've got this incredible colloquy between the divine power and the secular power, between God and mammon and man, between Jesus and Pilate. And so Jesus is before Pilate today, and you know, it had to be an interesting conversation because Pilate only spoke Greek and Latin. We don't know if Jesus knew any Greek at all. We knew that he spoke Aramaic, and probably biblical Hebrew. So what's going on between the two of them is they are literally speaking different languages. If you think Cool Hand Luke had a failure of communication, there's a real failure of communication here between Jesus and Pilate. And Pilate's first question, he says, are you the king of the Jews? Loaded question. Loaded question, because if he says, yes, I am the king of the Jews, that's sedition. He's just convicted himself. He's going to die. But Jesus is a good Jew. Yeah? The Jews always seem, especially Jesus, they always answer a question with a question. Somebody once asked the old rabbi, why do you Jews always answer a question with a question? And the rabbi said, why not? Well, Jesus is answering the question with a question. He says, now, are you saying this on your own, or have others told you about me? Well, he's really pushing Pilate's buttons. And you can tell it because Pilate comes up and says, I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Jew. Look, it's your people who handed you over to me, your king, your priests, your scribes, the Pharisees, they gave you to me. And then he asks the question. And the question is, what have you done? Now, there's a very famous comma in the Apostles' Creed. And the comma comes after born of the Virgin Mary, comma, suffered under Pontius Pilate. Well, for crying out loud, what happened between born of the Virgin Mary and suffered under Pontius Pilate? And the answer is everything. What have you done? For the last 3 years, he's been proclaiming the kingdom of God. For the last 3 years, he's turned the entire world upside down. For the last 3 years, he's made the blind to see and the deaf to hear and the lame to walk. The poor have the good news preached to them. For the last 3 years, he's been saying, look, there's a buried treasure, and if you find it, sell everything you've got because it is worth more than all the gold on earth. For the last 3 years, he has shown that widows know more about the financial system than the wise ones, and that refugees reveal what a nation is really like. Oh, for the last 3 years, this man has proclaimed a kingdom. And it is the kingdom of God, where God's in control. And Pilate knows nothing of this. This goes right over Pilate's head. Then Jesus says, my kingdom doesn't belong to this. Then finally he says, are you a king? And here's how he answers. My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my attendants would be fighting for it right now. In other words, if my kingdom was all about domination, about putting the Romans down, not to worry. The angels would be fighting on my behalf. And all of my attendants would be fighting on my behalf, and you would not be here today. But that's not where I'm coming from. That's not who I am. And the secular power gets none of this. And then Pilate does it again. So you are a king? Well, you're saying that I am a king. Now listen here. Because here's the key. Here's the key to everything we need to know today. Here's the answer. Jesus then says to Pilate, for this I was born. I came into the world to testify to the truth. Now, it's not in the gospel we had today, but after this, Pilate kind of glibly says, well, and what is the truth? Who knows what the truth is? Well, I'll tell you what the truth is. This is the truth. The truth is whatever coincides with reality, what is really real. That's the truth. If I cut my finger and I'm bleeding, the truth is I'm bleeding. Why? Because the reality confirms to what is happening. Well, the ultimate reality is not something you can see or touch or feel. The ultimate reality is God. The ultimate power is the power of God. And the power of God is the power of love. That's the great reality. So he is a king. Of course he's a king. But it's not the kingdom of downtown. It's the kingdom of hearts. And the question as I began this Mass this morning by asking you, who sits on the throne of your heart? Is it the King of Hearts? Is it the Master of the universe? Is it love incarnate? Is it Jesus the Christ? That's the question for us. That's the question before us. You see, history is repeating itself. You know, Mark Twain says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Well, history seems to be repeating itself because our world is in chaos like no other time that I can remember. No other time. I was born in the middle of the Second World War. But even with Vietnam, we did not go through what we are going through right now, with all of the pandemic and the global climate and who is coming to the fore. More secular, authoritarian figures than we can shake a stick at. And so that's the Advent. That's what's coming. And it will definitely depend on who the king is, who we bow before, who is our sovereign. You know, shortly after Pius XI proclaimed that Jesus is the king of the universe, the authoritarian powers in Mexico says, no, there's no Christianity, there's no Catholicism. No, it's our power, the same authoritarian power. There was a little group of peasants called the Cristeros, and the Cristeros said, no, we're not going to buy that at all. Jesus is the power. And one of the little ones, his name was Jose Sanchez de Rio. And Jose Sanchez de Rio was caught and was about to be executed. But right before they shot him and killed him, he shouted out, "Viva Cristo Rey!" Long live Christ the King. And the question for us all is, who sits on the throne of our hearts? What are we going to do about it?